Hi, I'm Riga. This is your and it's time to continue with our RWBY Run. Before we get started though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else, we'll take any thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. When we last left off, the villains had been ordered to meet with Raven. Pyrrha had a heart-to-heart with Oscar, the team was hard at work training, and right when we finished, a motorcycle bearing Goldilocks and the Ice Queen herself had rolled in from a portal into Haven. We return now as Ruby and the others are making food for Crow's expected recruiting effort. Crow calls Ruby in from the other room. Upon seeing each other, of course, Yang and Ruby embrace. As they do so, the others trickle in to see what's happening. Weiss is stunned, standing back and not really knowing what to do. Ruby calls to her to join the hug, and there's an awkward pause like it just isn't processing for Weiss. However, she snaps out of it and runs to embrace with Ruby and Yang. However, after a long, sweet embrace, it registers to Ruby that Weiss is shaking. Yang was more prepared this time and seems less fazed about it, but it doesn't take long for Ruby to realize that Weiss is gently sobbing into her shoulder. Not wanting it to get awkward and being conscious of her friend, Ruby moves with Weiss to sit on the couch, letting her get her emotions out. While she does this, Yang moves off to go and say hi to the others around the room. After a while, Weiss regains her composure somewhat. "I'm sorry," she mumbles into Ruby's shoulder. "I just thought this was all gone. See, everyone, and you, She trails off again. She had obviously known there was a good chance she was going to see Ruby, given everything that Yang had discussed with Raven, but it truly didn't sink in until she saw her, and then everyone else entering the room was just simply too much and pushed her over the edge. "Sorry for what?" Ruby replies cheerfully, not allowing Weiss to get self-conscious in the moment. She brightly smiles at Weiss. "It's amazing to see you, too." And Ruby warmly and energetically hugs her back, and after a moment of surprise, Weiss reciprocates, squeezing Ruby more playfully in a friendly way now her emotions had settled. Seeing that she had somewhat recovered, after this, Ruby moves off to help set out the food, and as she does so, she nods to the others and motions towards Weiss, thinking it's best that they go and comfort her too. They understand, and Nora, Jaune, and Pyrrha head over with a curious Oscar watching on. Weiss is wiping her eyes, recovering when Nora kneels down to be face to face with her, entering her vision. Weiss suddenly lights up and she jumps up to give Nora a more friendly hug, which takes Nora by complete surprise seeing this kind of enthusiasm from the Weiss that she knew. A stunned Ren is also surprised a moment later when she initiates a friendly hug with him too. This was a Weiss they'd never really seen before. She's smiling, truly happy, and then her eyes catch Pyrrha slightly more back behind the two. Pyrrha, who doesn't know what to make of Weiss's behavior either, is still glad at the safe return of her friend and is simply expecting to just be hugged in turn, which is why it confuses her to catch Weiss's eye for the briefest moment and see Weiss's eyes flick away. Weiss walks past her, giving her a friendly pat on the shoulder. "It's lovely to see you, Pyrrha," and she walks through to the dining room. Nora and Ren move to follow, not catching anything, but Pyrrha pauses. She was sure Weiss had just actively avoided making eye contact with her. Confused, she turns and follows. At the dinner table, they do the usual. They reminisce and tell stories, but more than once, Pyrrha notes Weiss avoiding her. She may be laughing at something someone said or telling a story looking around the table, but every time she catches sight of Pyrrha notices that she looks away. Pyrrha, who has had more than enough on her mind lately, is visibly confused, but decides not to bring it up for now. After dinner, Ozpin calls them in to go over everything that's said with Raven and not telling Lionheart. Ozpin promises to be open and tell the truth, etc. The entire time for this conversation, Pyrrha stood at the back, leaning against the glass wall. She doesn't say anything, but her eyes do track Ozpin as he walks around the room. Upon his discussion with Yang and his promise of honesty, she does remain silent, but her brows do furrow in thought. Over at Raven's camp, everything happens as usual. Cinder changes their plans and makes her deal. However, afterwards Watts doesn't fly off to Salem. Leaving Cinder and her crew to handle their own transportation with their own ship and get back, he gets on his and flies back into Haven. Flying back in a transport marked as belonging to the Haven Academy allows him to approach unhindered. Clearly troubled as he flies back in the thoughts of Cinder's deal, Watts is caught off guard when his scroll suddenly goes off. Being close enough to Haven now to actually receive a signal, he opens it, curious, and then quickly changes the ship's direction, heading for a new location. The ship touches down at the edge of a forest just outside Mistral's border. Curious, Watts steps off the ship to look around. He walks relatively casually, peeking behind some trees and checking out some bushes. Suddenly, Watts is tackled to the dirt and rolls, coming up to a blade pressed into his throat. He's face to face with a manic and wide-eyed Tyrian. He is absolutely coated in old blood. Most of his clothes are stained completely through in a horrible reddish brown. It seems as if, wounds and all, he had continued to tail the gang, but only now had he stumbled into range of the tower, and an SOS on his scroll went off. Tyrian, who'd forgotten he'd even activated that days ago, seems surprised it's Watts when he was just going to kill this random person and take their ship. He's panting, with little cackles of insanity, frozen in mid-strike. "If you don't mind..." Tyrian takes a moment, and then backs off, standing up. He's on wobbly legs and looking deranged. Watts indicates to the ship, following him inside and heading off towards Haven. Back with the gang, it's morning. Ruby, Weiss and Blake have their talk before Yang storms off when discussing Blake. Afterwards, Weiss and Yang have their heartfelt conversation about Blake leaving. It goes relatively the same, but Weiss is even more firm in her conviction that she'll be there not only for Blake, but Yang too. She will never lose any of them again. Ruby comes in to check on them, asking if everything's okay, and then says good because it's time for training. Down in the training area, Ruby is sparring with Ren in hand-to-hand combat. Ruby is losing, but she's moving much better. She's actively dodging strikes, predicting kicks, and landing well-placed shots. Swinging with both arms, it seems she's basically fully recovered. She has Ren on the ropes for a minute as she gets close enough landing a body shot, but as she winds up for a second one, Ren low sweeps her, sending her crashing to the ground. Before she can recover, Ren's knee is pressed into her neck as a pin with a hand ready to strike. There's a small pause, and Ruby taps out on Ren's knee with a chuckle. Ren also smiles, helping her back to her feet. They laugh a bit, and she pats him on the back as they start discussing and running through the fight again, as Ren talks her through what she could have done different and what to look out for. Weiss, who is completely new to seeing Ruby do stuff like this, is openly impressed, watching on from a distance. She's doing great, isn't she? Weiss jumps, not having realized someone had come up behind her, and spinning around, she's taken aback to see Pyrrha. Pyrrha had taken the initiative to see if her thoughts about Weiss were correct. Yeah, she's, Yep, since her injury, she's gotten a lot better at fighting and swordplay, since she has not been able to rely on Crescent Rose. Pyrrha just speaks factually, and is trying to gauge Weiss's response. Wow, that's great. Would you like to train? Pyrrha offers, raising her collapsed spear questioningly. No, I'm just going to train with Ruby. Pyrrha raises an eyebrow, looking over at Ruby, who is still talking with Ren and clearly busy. I want to see how much she's improved if she can use a sword now, so I'd like to test her. Weiss holds up Mertnaster as sort of a weak response. It would have sounded convincing if she'd gotten to it sooner, but as is, Pyrrha just nods, and instead walks over to talk with Oscar, baffled. Is everything alright? Huh? Yes, She looks over her shoulder to see Weiss easily disarming Ruby of a short sword, because of course she did, smacking Ruby's hand in the process with the tip of her own sword, causing Ruby to jump around, shaking her hand in pain as Weiss rushes in apologizing, much to Nora's amusement. Never mind. And Pyrrha raises her short sword to Oscar, who readies his cane. They exchange some strikes, Pyrrha taking it somewhat easy but making sure to press when she's on the attack, so Oscar gets quicker at defending since Pyrrha assumes that will be of more use to him in the short term. She presses and presses the attack, making him work for it. Then suddenly she backs off, letting him go on offense, which she immediately counters as he swings too wide, catching his arm and hip-tossing Oscar to the ground. She doesn't pin him, she stands up quite quickly and pulls him back to his feet, which he openly responds to with a groan. Pyrrha, for once, actually smirks at the kid. It's okay. You're taking to this faster than anyone I've ever seen. Just remember to keep your defenses up. Don't overreach for an attack you're not sure will land. He nods along with her advice, having warmed up to her a bit since their awkward initial meeting. Oscar? He looks up at her. I know it still hasn't been that long, but I wanted to say that you should be really proud of how far you've come. Please remember what I said to you, though. Please don't do anything foolish. It's not fair that you're in this position. So please, if it gets serious, let us protect you. I will protect you. And she firmly puts a hand on Oscar's shoulder and looks him straight in the eyes. Do you understand? Oscar, for the first time since leaving his aunt's house, felt suddenly very much like a kid with a parent. However, her words rang in his ears and he nods, more conviction in his movements now. Yes. After Raven has her meeting with Lionheart, we move to another room at Haven and rejoin Dr. Watts as he finishes rolling and tying off some fresh bandages over Tyrian's midsection. Tyrian, who by the looks of some empty bottles and the one he's currently drinking has had his fill of water, and his maniacal trance has died down. He also has an IV of blood hooked into his arm. You have no idea what I had to go through to get that blood, but since checking into a hospital would have been bad, I still managed it. So I do not see why you can't do this favor for me. Tyrian has a clear frown, annoyed at the conversation they're having. You're saying they're going to be at the school and you don't want me to be there? After they did this to me, and the little girl I meant to take back for our queen will be there as well? How can I not attend? Because this isn't part of the plan. If Cinder screws this up, then Salem will need us. Besides, you're in no shape to fight. We'd be of greater use to ensure a getaway and watch proceedings. Besides, if we aren't there, we can't be blamed for this either. This is Cinder's mission. Tyrian seems pretty unmoved by his argument. Do not worry, we'll be there to pick up the pieces. If Ruby escaped, you can grab her. Either way, it works out. So I meant to just sit here? No, actually. Tyrian looks up expectantly. How well can you move? He gets to his feet and hops a little from foot to foot, almost mockingly, and does some stretches. A very tiny micro wince gives away some pain, but he looks at Watts and shrugs confidently. Good, because when Cinder screws this up, I think we're going to be needed. I have a plan. Come with me. With that, Watts heads out, and Tyrian moves to follow. He has on just some black pants, and as he moves out, he grabs a basic black shirt to go with it that Watts had gotten him to replace his completely wrecked clothes. Back at the house, Ruby has her conversation with Oscar and Crow, where Crow gets a call from Leo saying that they'll meet up tomorrow night. After everyone has met and talked about it and they've had dinner, Pyrrha is lost in thought walking through the hallways heading back to her room. Turning a corner, she recoils for a moment, seeing Weiss of all people standing by her door waiting for her, looking down. Yes, Weiss? The last person who Pyrrha was expecting to see, obviously after their recent interaction. Weiss looks off to the side, still seemingly unable to meet Pyrrha's gaze. Can we talk, if you have a minute? Please? Sure. And Pyrrha leads her into her room, shutting the door to give them some privacy if the others are up and about. Pyrrha is still quite unsure of what to expect, and motions for Weiss to sit on her bed, and she grabs a chair to sit and listen. So... Weiss's voice is already starting to crack. This is really difficult. Pyrrha tilts her head in confusion, but gives Weiss time. I'm sure that you've noticed that I'm, and with you, and I just... Pyrrha puts out a hand supportively on Weiss's knee. It's alright. Take your time. Weiss nods and takes a shaky breath to recompose herself. It's about John. Pyrrha's hand drops from Weiss's knee, and her eyes widen, not prepared for this conversational direction. What about him? Her tone is much more short and defensive now. Weiss motions with her hands, but words don't come out. She gulps and chokes on a second attempt to speak, before she finally cracks. It's my fault! She bursts into tears and slides off the bed onto her knees and clutches Pyrrha around the waist, burying her face in Pyrrha's hip. It's my fault. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. She is completely crying and wailing now. Pyrrha, who was so very unprepared for this, is sitting somewhat stunned as her brain starts trying to work out what is going on. What do you mean by your fault? Weiss, who is near hyperventilating, still clutching Pyrrha around the waist and begging for forgiveness, ekes out a response. It was me. I told him to go. And finally, now after 2 volumes, we see the thing that has stuck with Weiss, that she couldn't say to Whitley, that's been playing over and over in her mind for months as she listened to Jaune's old voice messages, the thing she can't stop seeing. Flashing back, we see the events that put this story in motion. Jaune, having escaped his locker, landing and making his way to the ground, runs into the square where the tower is. In front of him are Weiss and RWBY battling Grimm around the tower. Jaune calls out to them, RWBY looking over first. RWBY and Weiss have actually drawn the Grimm off to the side in battle, so there is a clear path to get to the tower now. Jaune is clearly torn, wanting to help his friends. But then Weiss calls out, yelling over to him, We can handle them! Go! Jaune is still conflicted, but he grits his teeth and runs off towards the tower to try and save Pyrrha. We cut back to Weiss, sobbing. If I hadn't said to go, he'd still, as she continues to break down by Pyrrha's side. Pyrrha is again stunned, thinking over the scenario that she could only imagine. She closes her eyes for a moment, takes a breath for herself to process, before reaching down and picking Weiss up under the arms and dragging her to her feet as she also stands, so they're now standing face to face. Listen to me. Weiss sniffs, still a complete mess. Weiss, listen to me. She snaps to attention, fearing the response now. Face to face, beside a bed, it was just like the last time her father had hit her. She couldn't imagine what Pyrrha will do. Pyrrha takes a pause, raising a hand, and Weiss flinches. But instead, she's pulled into a gentle hug against Pyrrha's breastplate. I miss Jaune. I will always miss Jaune. But it's not your fault. Don't ever say that. You helped Jaune do what he wanted to do. You did the right thing. Jaune saved my life. While I wish things were different, I have come to terms with the fact that he would find comfort in that, knowing he succeeded, just like I would if I had died saving him. If he hadn't arrived when he did, then I would be dead. And he arrived when he did because of you. Do you hear me? She hugs Weiss a little tighter. You did not kill Jaune. That burden is not on you, but you did save my life. Weiss is in total disbelief. Her months of grief, her fear, her anger at herself, and now the person who should hate her the most has done this. Weiss has cried a lot since the fall of Beacon, but for the first time in a very, very long time, a fresh tear of joy runs down her cheek as she warmly embraces Pyrrha, the warrior's bronze armor casting a golden light on the hugging pair as the setting sun shines in through the windows. That night, 2 dark figures move through Mistral. Sticking to the shadows, they appear near a large fenced building. Are you sure about this? Yes, I have no doubt things will get out of hand. If they do, then we will need a backup plan. If nothing goes wrong, then no harm done. He pulls out his scroll, and there's a city map with 4 locations marked in a circle. We must hit the other 3 tonight as well. So remember, be quick and quiet. If you get caught, then Salem's entire plan is up in smoke. So absolutely no killing. Get to the hangar, get in, and get out. I assume you can handle that. Tyrian looks annoyed as ever when it's reinforced that there will be no killing, but he shrugs again. Good, now take them and go. Watts hands Tyrian a small bag that clinks a little with some metal objects inside, that he tucks away before disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, what spots the slightest glimpse of something moving over the barbed wire fence and into the compound. Satisfied, Watts simply smirks to himself. Finally, it's time. Well rested from a good night's sleep, the team approach Haven. It's already night again as the full moon hangs over the academy. As one, they approach. Crow, Nora, Ren, Pyrrha, Oscar, RWBY, Weiss, and Yang. RWBY takes one last look at the communications tower as they pass by, still oddly fascinated by them. But no thoughts of what seemed like forever ago. She quickly turns her mind back to the task at hand, rejoining the others just in time as Crow opens the door and they head into Haven Academy. And that's all we have time for today. Their greatest test still awaits them, but we have made progress. Finally, Weiss has given in and talked about what's been racking her mind since Beacon, only to be met with forgiveness and warmth. RWBY is in fighting shape, finally, and Oscar is getting much better under Pyrrha's guidance as she continues to reassure him of their protection. Plus, Watts and Tyrian have a plan of their own that they seem to be setting in motion. What will happen once the big climax commences? Find out next time on RWBY Runs. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Please leave a like and such if you enjoyed it. But until next time, my name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope I did alright.